Mm. Hi there, Yeshiva Teres Hatzvi. Thank you for joining us. I would like to start discussing a bit about the importance of mitzvot. And to understand the importance of mitzvot, I want to understand what happens when we have a conflict in mitzvot, such as we have opposing commandments. On the one hand, you're told to do something, on the other hand, you're told not to do something. What takes priority? And by understanding these small conflicts, you can have a larger understanding of what's the purpose of mitzvot and why are we doing them all together. So I'm going to start with one little example. With this, we'll start with the riddle. We had Pesach not too long ago, and now we're heading to Shavuot. Two times in the Nevi'im and Ketuvim, two times in our Nach, part of the Tanakh, that we have a Korban Pesach that we were supposed to have with matzot, and we didn't have matzot. Or to say it a bit better, to be more exact, there were twice that we did not have matzot at Leil Seder. So one of them, I would start with the easier one, is the one I'm not going to be discussing, is Esther. She decided to make a fast for 3 days, 12 months after Adar, for the middle of the month, in order for preparation to meet with Achashverosh. It was a scary meeting. So then we had a conflicting time. On the one hand, we have to eat the matzot. On the other hand, we have a fast day, so we can't eat them. So there, Esther decided that it's more important to fast for 3 days than to eat the matzah on Leila Pesach, where we have a mitzvah from the Torah to eat. So the question is, was Esther right or wrong? So from this, I want to use the previous example that we had in the Torah, in the Nevi'im, of when we chose not to eat matzah on Leil HaSeder. So with this, I want to start with a bit of background. Is that what's the problem with eating matzah? When was this? And why didn't we eat the matzah? And then see from here, what do we do going forward when we have conflicting mitzvot? So one is that we have a mitzvah of the Torah says, I'm starting with the source one of Chadash. We read in Parshat Emor that when you have new grades, you can't eat them until they go through the day after Pesach. So I'm going to start reading it. Source one by Deber Adonai Moshe Lemor. When you first enter Israel, when it's first applicable, when I give you, and we cut the gatherings, and we bring the Korban Omer. So we have to do this the day after Pesach, is when the grain switched from not allowed to allowed. And I'm going to skip to the last bold line in source one. And until then, it's prohibited to eat. Until you bring the korban on the door, and it applies to wherever you are living. That is one hand. So what do we have? We have an Isur of Chadash. And when could you eat the grains of the new year? Starting the day after Pesach. So now what happens on Pesach? Which time do you have a Pesach that was problematic? Yoshua. What happened with Yoshua? When did we enter Israel? Yudal and Nisan. Now I'm going to read source 2 starting from the second Pasuk. Vayachanu b'nei Yisrael ba'Gilgal. B'nei Yisrael are camped at Gilgal. Vayasu et Pesach. And they did the Pesach. Barba'asar yom lachodesh be'erev barvot Yericho. So they did it on the 14th Pesach, which is going to bring the Korban Pesach. And then what happens? When did they start eating from the grains in Israel? When did they start eating wheat? The day after Pesach. Why? Because the Torah told us we can't eat it beforehand. So now, what did happen? They didn't eat the new grains until the day after Pesach. And what did they eat until then? And that's when the man stopped. Because they entered the land. And that's where there's going to have no more man. And they switched from eating the man to eating the grain of Israel. So now let's understand this. the time of Yoshua, they had the first big Pesach. This was such a big Pesach because they didn't have Pesach in the desert for 40 years because there was no Brit Milah in the 40 years. We had a problem. So there's no Pesach. Now we have the Korban Pesach. Everybody's really happy. But what don't we have? We have matzah. Why don't we have matzah? Because we can't eat from the grain. Why can't we eat from the grain? Because it's new. And what we're eating from before that? We're eating from the man. And so the Torah says, source number 3, in Parshat Vishalach, what's the mitzvah of the man? Bnei Israel achlu et haman. Bnei Israel ate the man, arba'im shana for 40 years. Ad bo el eretz no shavet, until they entered Israel. Et haman achlu ad boam el ksei eretz Canaan. And they ate the man until they got to the land of Canaan, which makes perfect sense. So now all this makes perfect sense. What do we have here? We have the Korban Pesach, we have the matzah, but more important than the matzah is eating the grain from the proper year. And if that's not available, what do we see from Yoshua? That Yoshua chose for the monumentous Pesach to have no matzah on the Pesach, to have the Korban Pesach without the man. That is great if you're on Atkins, on a low-carb diet, no matzah. But to understand this, the big matzah, we're not eating. So Tosfot asked this question, what's our priorities here? I'm going to read source number 4, Tosfot Daf Lamed Chet, Ekarov Omer V'Hadar Echol. So it's quoting the Gemara. The Gemara is discussing when did the Isra of Chadash start, and it brings the story. So now I'm going to go into the Tosfot. Yushalmi Maksha. We have a Gemara in Yushalmi. Lama lochlu matzah michadash. Why can't we say that the eating the matzah is more important than the Isra of Chadash? We should eat the matzah. It's that important to us. We have a mitzvah of the Torah to eat the matzot. The chadash, and eating of the matzah is more important than the lotasei of chadash umitaret. And what does the Gemara in the Yerushalmi say? Dein asei dekodem adibur dochel lotasei da'achar adibur. Is that now we have a new hierarchy of mitzvot. We have mitzvot before Har Sinai and mitzvot after Har Sinai. When were we mitzvah of Pesach? Obviously, before Har Sinai, we brought the Pesach in Egypt. When do we eat? When do we have the Isur of Chadash? It was given to us at Har Sinai in Parshat Emor, or that would apply when we enter Israel. So the mitzvot that we have of Pesach, that's before Har Sinai. That's great, not as important as Chadash, because what's Chadash is after Har Sinai. So this shows us that we have the mitzvot that come after Har Sinai are more important, and therefore we can't apply the concept of being proactive of an aseh dochel lo taseh. What's aseh dochel lo taseh? That the mitzvah you should be doing is more important than to abstain from the restriction. That is the first answer. Inami, or lo yesh lomar. Perhaps you could say tigzera k'zayit rishon atu k'zayit sheni. That we have. What's the problem? Eating the first k'zayit you should in theory eat. But you could eat more than kazait. I think this is a logical understanding that we don't know exactly how much a kazait is. So a person's not sure if it's this much, this much, or this much. A person doesn't know exactly how big the olive is. So they're not going to eat too much. Or perhaps the person's hungry. Oh, I didn't have matzah. So look, I'm going to eat another piece of matzah. They had food of Israel. But I want to go to more fundamental here. What's going on in this Tosfot? We have two answers. We have the question, why isn't the eating of the matzah more important than the prohibition of Chadash? So what does Tosfot answer? That we have two possibilities. One is that there's a Gemara in Yerushalmi that discusses hierarchy of mitzvah before and after Har Sinai. And the other possibility is that he eats too much. But what's interesting? If the Gemara gives an answer to Yerushalmi, why is Tosfot trying to give his own answer? What is wrong with the first answer? The Tosfot has to say, I need my own answer. The first answer is not good enough. That's a Gemara. We have Tosfot saying, I'm just as equal as the Gemara. Inami, or Yesh Lomar, we could suggest this. This is a bit of a weird thing. Tosfot doesn't usually argue with the Gemara. So in order to understand this, we have to figure out what's wrong with this Gemara and to figure out why Tosfot has to offer his answer. And from this, we'll get to, I think, one of the most interesting points in all of understanding of the mitzvot. Now, what's going on here? Let's go forwards. That we have our Bavli. In our Bavli, we have a Gemara on Shabbat, and we learn the concept of aseh dochel lo taseh, of being proactive in mitzvah. It's more important than not doing mitzvah. Where do we see this? I'll give you an example. A baby boy who was born. We have a former madrich in Tano Rap, and they had their brit milah at shul for the 8th day for their son this past Shabbat because it was the 8th day. So what do we have here? We have the mitzvah of the Brit Milah on the 8th day, and we have the Isur of Shabbat. What's more important? We do the Brit Milah on the 8th day, overriding the Isur of Shabbat. Why do you do this? Aseh docha lo taseh. And I'm going to continue in this Gemara. And this Gemara goes, we could even learn from this the concept of Pikuach Nefesh. Well, how do we learn Pikuach Nefesh from this? Just as Brit Milah, which is one limb, is Docha Shabbat. So to say, the whole body is. And then we have, how do we, let's even go a bit further. We have, this doesn't necessarily apply against Shabbat, it applies with other mitzvot. We have Tzaraat, and we have Brit Milah, for example. What takes priorities? You do the Brit Milah over Tzaraat. Because let's say, where's the contradiction? The person has Tzaraat on the foreskin. So you have to remove the foreskin if you have to do the Brit Milah on the 8th day. And you could go on further and further. And so what's the concept? We have the concept of Aseh Docha Lo Taseh. So now we have the Bavli, we learn, let's say Brit Milah and Shabbat, use this classic example. Or we have the concept of another example, Tzitzit and Kilayim. We have the Torah says in source 6, Lo Tibashatne Semer Fishtin Yachtav. We're not supposed to wear wool and linen on our clothing. And then it says, Dilim Taseh al Arba Kavol Ksutecha. You're supposed to have tzitzit. Asher Tichaseva. So what happens if your baguette is wool and your strings are linen? You're supposed to put on tzitzit. So now I want to move to understand this. What is going on in all these examples? Why is this a problem we had before? The Yerushalmi that says that you have the mitzvot are more important after Har Sinai than from before Har Sinai. Hi, welcome, Gross. Should I give you a quick recap? With not with your hand, yes, no?
I've been here the whole time. I just didn't have my camera on.
Okay, perfect. So now let's understand what's going on with these examples. All of these are examples go against the Yerushalmi. Why? Because we have the Bavli that say Mila Kos instead of Shabbat. When was the Mila given? Before Har Sinai. So now the Yerushalmi says it only applies to mitzvah before after Har Sinai. Understanding that Pesach is before Har Sinai, that's less important than Chadash, which is after Har Sinai. But we have examples. Mila is more important than Shabbat. In a sense that you do Mila on the 8th day, even on Shabbat. Mila is from before Har Sinai. So Tosfot saying that this answer to Yerushalmi is not that great. Our Gemara contradicts it. We follow the Bavli. One point to the people in Chutz La'aretz. So now let's understand this. How do we understand the example in the Yerushalmi? Because the Yerushalmi understands that there's Brit Milah also. And they also have the Brit Milah on the 8th day on Shabbat. So how do you understand the Yerushalmi? That you say after Shabbat, after Matan Torah and before Matan Torah. So in order to understand the Yerushalmi, the Noda Yehuda gives an interesting example. We have two mitzvot. And I say no lo taseh. One says you have to do something, the other one says not to do something. How do you know what takes priority? You have no way of knowing. But what do you know? If the both mitzvot are given at the same time, both before Har Sinai or both after Har Sinai, you know that when God tells you to do something and he tells you not to do something, he knows there's a conflict. So if there's a conflict and he tells you to do it, it means you're supposed to do it. And he knows that there's a problem with standing. So what does this apply? This applies if both of them are before Har Sinai or both after Har Sinai because they're both given at the same time. If they cross patterns with each other, one is before and the other is after, I don't know which one to apply, but it only applies if you say that these mitzvot were given hand in hand at the same time. So I give an interesting example that I don't know what the rule is. You have Pesach, which is before or after Har Sinai, before, and Gid Hanasha, which is before Har Sinai. When is Pesach given in Egypt? When was Gid Hanasha given with Yaakov when he got into a fight? There's a difference in time. And in the Korban Pesach, are you supposed to eat the Gid Hanasha? Would you say that the Aseh Docha Lo Taseh, or would you say no, because they're both before Har Sinai, but they're both two different generations before Har Sinai? That's a question I'm going to leave the note of Yehuda with. I don't know. And the other examples, I'm going to give the new note of Yehuda would, in a sense, be Mila and Tzaraat, because Mila is before Har Sinai and Tzaraat is after Har Sinai. We supply there that perhaps there could be a problem of Aseh Docha Lo Taseh. So I'll leave the note of Yehuda aside. I want to move forwards. Is there another example from Rav Yosef Engel, who lived 150 years ago, and he fled Russia to Austria before World War I. And in Austria, they tried to pressure him by the Austrian government to sign a petition against the Balfour Declaration, say that us Rabbanim are against the Balfour Declaration, and he said, whoever signs this partition, may their hands be cut off. So that's a bit of who he was, and he gives another example, is that it goes by your intention. If you're doing an asay, your intention is to do a mitzvah, and the lo taseh, you're transgressing by accident. You're not intending on transgressing. It's a result of you doing the mitzvah. So we trust the Kodesh Baruch Hu to do it by your intention. Your intention to do the mitzvah properly. That's more important than the lo taseh. I think that's a beautiful answer, but it's kind of hard to say that you're not intending on doing it because you know it's a result of it doing done. If I do the Brit Milah, I'm being Mechalel Shabbat. So it's not exactly clear. I don't think his answer, but I do think it's a beautiful concept that what's the most important thing in the mitzvah are your intentions. So if you're planning on doing the positive mitzvah, you're not choosing on doing the lo taseh. It's a violation that happens in God's discretion. That's his answer. And another answer is brought down, perhaps in the name of the Gemara and Rav Ashi, that is if they're done simultaneously. What is the Amit source number 8 of Rav Ashi? When they're simultaneous, then you say Asi docha lo taseh. But if there's a time difference between them, you don't say it. What's the problem with that? There's an example of doing Kisui Hadam on Yom Tov, that perhaps you have to prepare the Kisui Adam on Yom Tov, and there we have a change in timing. All those are small points. Now I want to get into perhaps the biggest point I want to make is the Ramban. Why do we say Aseh Docha Lo Taseh? Why is one mitzvah more important than the other? The Ramban. So before we get to the Ramban, a quick summary for people who joined late is that we have a concept of Yoshua. He did not bring the matzah. He did not eat the matzah for Leil HaSeder, even though this is the first Pesach in 40 years. Why not? Perhaps we suggested because of 2 reasons. One is, why didn't you do it? Because we have Chadash. Why do we have the Yisur of Chadash? So the Torah says that we start Chadash the day after Pesach. He entered Eretz Yisrael the day of the Korban Pesach. So now he wants to use the wheat. All the wheat is from last year's. He only gets the new wheat from the next year, the day after Pesach, so he couldn't do it. Until then, he was eating the man. And from the man, he couldn't make the matzah. So now we're going to go. So then Tosfot asks, well, why don't we say Aseh Docha Lo Taseh? We should be proactive. We should do the mitzvot. And he gives 2 answers. One is one is from before our Sinai, which we discussed in great length, and the other one's after our Sinai, and we can't cross them. And the other answer is that perhaps you could eat too much. Fundamentally, we say that you're right, that you should eat the matzah, but because we have a bigger rabbinic decree, and I'm going to add now, where do we have something similar to that? We have lulav on the first day of Sukkot, if it's on Shabbat. You have a mitzvah d'oraita to have the lulav, but you have an isur of perhaps you're going to carry it on Shabbat. In theory, you're supposed to say lulav is more important, but carrying it on Shabbat, d'Rabbanan, you don't do it because you're going to ask somebody how to do it. Or the same for blowing a shofar on Rosh Hashanah. You're going to bring it to an expert. Even though you have a mitzvah d'oraita to do, we say d'Rabbanan, you don't, and that's a side reason. So now we'll go into the Rabban. So the Rabban asks separately altogether. We have the Shtei Luchot. We get on Shavuot, Luchot Rishonot, and then we have Luchot Shniyot. And Luchot Rishon says Zachor et Yom HaShabbat Lekacho. And what does the second Luchot say? Shamor. We're supposed to protect them. So why do you have the double? So I'm going to read the last source now, source 10. V'emet 2. And the truth is, the mitzvah of Zachor is a proactive mitzvah. You're supposed to get your clothes ready for Shabbat. Eat nice food on Shabbat. You're supposed to enjoy your Shabbat. That is being proactive. And when you're doing the mitzvah, it shows your love to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. You're keeping his mitzvot. You're holding the lulav. You're being proactive. You're telling HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I care for your mitzvot. That is love to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that's part of the mercy. And that creates the relationship of love and mercy. That's the mitzvah aseh. That is eating the matzah. But, however, when you abstain from an isur, you keep Shabbat. You don't eat the chadash. You say, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to eat the pig. That's from a lo taseh. That follows justice. That is strict. And that's because you're afraid of Kodesh Baruch Hu. And we're afraid to do the wrong thing. And therefore, mitzvah aseh gdola mitzvah lo taseh. Doing a mitzvah aseh, eating the matzah is more important than the lo taseh of chadash. We're supposed to always be proactive in our mitzvot. We're supposed to do the mitzvot, not abstain, because we're supposed to love HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That is more important than our fear to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We should serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu with love. It's more important to be with loving relationship than with fear. And therefore we say that the mitzvah aseh is more important as a rule than lo taseh. But on the other hand, if you violate the mitzvah, if you violate the lo taseh, a transgression, it's more severe because it's saying that you don't have any fear of God. And that is a very severe thing. You're saying that you don't care for God. But there's no punishment for not having love. So the one, it's better to follow mitzvah of love. But if you're going to reject the mitzvah, rejecting one of love is less severe than rejecting one of fear. V'kmo lulav etzitzit eini osa suka eini osa shezehedronai yamachin oto ad shkablu lav lasot ad shetzei nafsho. So now what am I going to say here with the Ramban? I'm going to say very something I think which is a fascinating point of mitzvot. On the one hand, we say aseh is more important because of love. Now go to the Tosfot's second answer. What was Tosfot's second answer? That in theory you're supposed to eat the matzah. Why don't we eat the matzah? Because of chadash. Why is chadash more important? Because we're going to eat too much matzah. So in theory you're supposed to eat the matzah, but the rabbinic decree is not to eat the matzah because you're going to eat too much. So now let's understand the Ramban. In theory, you're supposed to follow with love, but because we're going to make errors, we make a rabbinic decree of saying we should not do it. So every decree we have has a reward and has a price. What's the reward? That we keep the mitzvah. What's the price? We lose the ahava of a Kodesh Baruch Hu. Now we're not eating the matzah because the chadash is more important, which is according to the Tosfot's second answer, a rabbinic change. And on the one hand, we're keeping the mitzvot, we're keeping chadash. The other hand, we're losing the concept of aseh. And I think that's what we have each gzera of Chazal. We have to keep the gzerot. We have to keep them. And that's how Judaism gets preserved from Yoshua, from the time of one generation after Matan Torah until our current generation. It's something important to us, so we keep gzerot. But on the flip side, when each time we have a gzera, we lose a feeling of the Ava. Part of our loving relationship with Kodesh Baruch Hu is being compromised. And that each gzera takes a toll on us. We lose the concept of what it's like to serve Kodesh Baruch Hu purely out of love, because we're adding to ourselves these extra decrees. So what does this take us? I want to now lead to a quick summary. Is that we have the concept of aseh docha lo taseh. We have the concept of being active, which is better. Where do we see this from? We see this from, for example, Mila on Shabbat. So what are the reasons for it? So the first answer, Tosfot, because before and after Har Sinai, we have a priority of the mitzvot. So in order to understand that, well, we see examples of the other way, that Mila comes priority. So what do we say? That they come both at the same time. It shows that the mitzvot were part and parcel of the other mitzvah, were to keep that this mitzvah doesn't apply. What does that mean? That Kodesh Baruch Hu told us to do Aleph, and he told us not to do Bet. So it means that if you tell me not to do Bet, I still have to do Aleph, it means I have to do Aleph anyway. It only applies if they're both before or both after Har Sinai. Because if there's a problem otherwise, then I don't know which one's more important. That's no Yehuda. The second one is Rav Yosef Elgin, who stood up for the Balfour Declaration of saying the Jews have a right to return to Israel. And he said any rabbi that would, under pressure, refuse to would sign anything against it, their hands should get cut off. And what does he say? That goes by your attention. Is your attention basically on following the mitzvah? Say then lo taseh doesn't apply because you're doing the right thing. Lo taseh is when you choose to violate the lo taseh. Therefore, it's more important. The other possibility is if it's simultaneously not. And the Ramban gives which I think is the most important concept of love being more important than fear. And from this, we should say, what's the concept of us doing mitzvot? We're receiving the mitzvot on Shavuot, so we can have a loving relationship to us and the Kodesh Baruch Hu. The Satmar, for example, have a minhag that on Mincha on Shavuot, they take out a cup of wine and they make a birchot, a shava brachot of a marriage between us and Kodesh Baruch Hu. It should be a loving relationship. I'm not saying their minhag is right or wrong, but I'm saying the concept is that a relationship should be based on love. And that is why an aseh is more important, because we should be following our mitzvot based on aseh of saying we want to do something over saying we want to take a step back, because our loving Kodesh Baruch Hu is the most important thing going forwards. And I think that's a bit of what yeshiva is. In yeshiva, we have all these decrees of what to do, what not to do. But what's the concept of yeshiva? We should enjoy ourselves. We should have a good time learning Torah. And I think that is the key of us keeping our mitzvot going forwards. Chag Sameach.